Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We'll give everyone a couple of minutes to log on. Really quick, my name is Rachel Guillory. I'm the Coastal Communications Manager at the National Audubon Society. We're really glad that you could join us today for this webinar. And I want to say a special thank you to those of you who are participating in Audubon's Seabird Action Week this week. All week long, a lot of folks from around the country are speaking up for seabirds by writing to their members of Congress. Some of our dedicated members are even meeting with their congressional representatives over Zoom this week to advocate for seabirds and the places that they need to rest and to find food and raise their little chicks. So you can participate in Seabird Action Week if you haven't already by clicking the link that we are about to drop in the chat right here to take action for seabirds. Okay, so today we're going to learn more about the people behind Audubon Seabird Institute, which is formerly, maybe more familiarly known as Project Puffin. We have 5 panelists today who are some of our current and former staff, fellows, and interns, known affectionately as Puffineers. They've spent time working with seabirds on remote islands in Maine, collecting data, using decoys, as you'll see on the screen soon, to restore seabird populations, even holding real live seabirds in their hands, these lucky ducks. Their work is so important for us to understand how we can better protect seabirds in Congress and around the country, because they've taken what they've learned in Maine and replicated it to restore other seabird populations around the world. So we'll have a great discussion today. Please feel free to type any questions that you have for our panelists in the chat, and we'll get to as many as we can in the hour. Also, this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available to watch again on the National Audubon Society's Facebook page. No Facebook account required to watch it. So I'll hand it over now to Dr. Don Lyons, Conservation Science Director for Audubon's Seabird Institute. He's going to tell us more about the Seabird Institute and introduce our panelists.
There we go. I hope everyone can hear me now. Looks good. Well, thank you, Rachel. Thanks everyone for joining the webinar today, and thanks to our panelists in advance. I wanted to just say a few words about the Seabird Institute and share kind of our work as an introduction to the folks here in the view. And I'll start just by saying, kind of from my perspective, the Seabird Institute is a really elegant marriage of folks interested in seabirds, you know, the seabird lovers, but folks who have a variety of backgrounds. That includes backgrounds in science and conservation, education and outreach, and certainly, as many of you are experiencing this week, some real expertise in communicating conservation needs to policymakers and helping them understand the kinds of policies we need to protect seabirds and the places where they exist. But today we'll talk a bit more about our science and conservation work. And the roots of that work go back nearly 50 years. We're still a couple years out from 50. To the beginnings of Project Puffin, which was an effort initiated by our program's founder, Steve Kress, to restore Atlantic puffins to a single island in Maine, Eastern Egg Rock. That's where all this started. That single idea necessitated the development of restoration techniques. No one had ever restored a seabird colony before. And those restoration techniques are now helping around a quarter of all the seabird species around the world. That effort also had expanded in Maine and led Audubon to take on the management of 7 islands over ensuing decades in partnership with some federal and state agency partners. And the program has restored the entire suite of native seabird species to the Gulf of Maine ecosystem. It's a really exciting story. And along the way, of course, we've collected data on a lot of different things. Probably most significantly, just on how many seabirds are there, how successful are they at raising chicks, what are they eating, but many other measures too. And these data sets, many of which are now several decades long, represent an amazing archive on these seabirds and the Gulf of Maine. When we analyze those data, the seabirds really let us know a great deal about themselves, but also not just about them, about their ecosystem, and what actions we might take that would really help their populations thrive. For one thing, seabird diets tell us how our country is doing managing fish stocks, which fish are doing well and which are struggling. And we can use those results to help fisheries managers better plan out their harvest levels that they set, but also importantly, to encourage lawmakers to protect and enhance the fisheries management laws, both at the national level, which some of you have been focused on this week, but also at more state and local levels too. Now, the degree of success puffins have, and puffins and other seabirds have at raising chicks can tell us a lot of things, but interestingly, a lot about how climate change is impacting the oceans. And that can really help us advocate for a lot of good policy, including climate-minded fisheries management, greater renewable energy development, and many other policies that can help fight the impacts of climate change are already with us and which will come. Also, seabird tracking data, which the program has collected some of, and that's tracking them both while they're raising chicks and during their migrations, can really help us identify important places in the ocean to protect. Places where seabirds can reliably find food, both for their own survival, but also to help them feed their chicks and raise those chicks, that next generation. So today I am super excited, and we're so fortunate to talk with several people who have helped collect these data, and so really played an important role in helping us understand what the seabirds are telling us. At the 7 islands where we work, we have field stations where people live all summer with the seabirds. That is just a personal joy for me. But they're out there with the seabirds every day, protecting them and their habitats, and observing them all the time. And we have 5 of those folks with us today from various eras of our program's history. I just want to share that to me, these folks are the real heroes of Project Puffin and what we know now as the Seabird Institute. So today I'm going to call on each of them to start us off to introduce themselves, and then we'll move into more of a question and answer session and kind of have a fun discussion. So to the panelists, if you could each mention when you worked with the program, kind of your career arc since then, and what you do now, that'd be great. And I'll go through you in order. And I guess we'll start with Andy Stamper. Andy, you wanna share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi. I'm Andy Stamper. I currently work at Disney, but I started my career way back in the late 80s, where I spent several summers as an intern out in Project Puffin. I was on I think every island at the time, Stratton, Eastern Egg, Seal, and Matinicus. And from there, I probably diverged from most of the panelists, took a different tact on it. I decided to go through the animal health path, and I took the lessons that were deeply ingrained with me and what I learned on the seabird colonies, and went through a aquatic veterinary path where I focused at the end on pretty much ecosystem health in the marine environment. From Project Puffin, I went to Purdue University and University of Santa Cruz, and then worked on seal colonies but again, with that population medicine in mind. Once I got my veterinary degree, I actually did some internships at aquariums, but I ended up actually working for Sue Shubal's father at the New England Aquarium as the head vet there. From there, I got a diplomat in the zoo and aquatic animal medicine, and worked several places, but ended up at Disney, where I worked on science, but right now I'm a conservation science manager for Disney Worldwide, focusing on the marine environment. Anywhere from seafood issues, which would include, impacts of seabirds and marine animals. And right now, my biggest focus is trying to work and restore coral reefs. So that's where I ended up.
Wow, that's amazing. Why don't we go to Jennifer Boyce next? Jen?
Sure. Hi, Don. Thanks for having me today. It's always great to get together and talk about Puffins and Puffin Project stories. I'm currently located in Long Beach, California. I was the island supervisor of Eastern Egg Rock from 1993 to 1996. I spent all my time on Egg Rock as a supervisor. I had previously completed my undergraduate degree at the University of Maine, so have a long history with Maine. And while I was working on the Puffin project, I completed my master's with the Antioch, New England Graduate School, and I did my thesis looking at kind of what Don was referencing, using tern diet as indicators of changes in the fish ecosystems. Following the Puffin project work, I was fortunate to take my experience with that position and travel out to California with Sue Shubal as well. And we both worked on the Devil Slide Rock restoration project in San Francisco, where we restored a colony of common murres to Devil Slide Rock using social attraction techniques that we learned on the Puffin project, decoys and sound, to attract the birds back to this historic colony that had been eradicated of murres due to oil spill impacts from oil spills and gill netting. And then from there, I was able to take that experience and move into the position I'm in now with the NOAA Restoration Center, who I've been with for over 20 years. And I work on seabird restoration projects, mostly related to restoring impacts from oil spills, using settlement funds from oil spills to do habitat and seabird restoration projects to bring back the birds that were impacted by oil spills. And in that position, I've used social attraction techniques on the Channel Islands, and recently was involved in a multi-year project with Alfonso and Stu and Dr. Kress in Mexico, restoring seabird populations along the Baja Islands. So it's just been a real great springboard to my career, and I'm very grateful for my time spent on the islands and all the skills I learned there.
Cool. Well, thanks, Jen. And I think you gave us a great segue for Alfonso to share kind of his story.
Yes, thank you, Don. Thank you for having me. And yes, as Jen mentioned, I've been working with some of them for some years now, especially on the projects that we were sharing in Mexico. But before I go into that, I had a chance to join Project Puffin in 2015 as the Josephine Danneman Harris International Seabird Fellow at that time. And of course, I had a chance to visit some of the islands, such as Seal, Stratton, and Eastern Egg Rock for a brief period of time, quite enjoyable. Then I came back to Mexico to work 3 more years with Conservación de Islas, also known as GESI, on a seabird restoration program, the one that was mentioned by Jen, and on islands all around the country. Then after that, I moved to the UK for an MPhil in conservation at the University of Cambridge. After that, I came back to Mexico to work on sustainable development goals. And more recently, well, currently I'm working for BirdLife in West Africa, coordinating the marine conservation program for that organization. And as part of it, we are working on some topics such as bycatch, trying to mitigate bycatch on seabirds and sea turtles, as well as on protecting important migratory places, MPAs, along different countries in West Africa, from Mauritania all the way down to Guinea-Bissau. And we're also working in Cabo Verde, one of the hotspots for seabirds in the world, again, just trying to protect those important colonies. I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, well, thanks for joining us, Alfonso. You're such an excellent example of how connections to Project Puffin and the Seabird Institute have propagated, around the world, to amazing work and projects. Next up, we're going to have one of our current Puffineers, and that's Kay Garlick-Ott.
Hi everyone, I'm Kay. So like Don said, I'm one of the current Puffineers, but I actually started with the project in 2018 as a research assistant on Eastern Egg Rock. And that was just after I graduated from Pomona College. So it was my first job out of college. I was a research assistant for 2 years. And then last year, and then this upcoming summer, I was and will be the supervisor of Eastern Egg Rock. So really excited for what the season has in store, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit today. And yeah, as far as career goes, compared to these guys, I'm like the turn chick that's just about to leave the island. Got my fledgling wings and just about to go, but I was recently accepted into a grad program at UC Davis, where I'll be attending in the fall, and I'm hoping to study sort of the intersection of behavior and conservation in seabird ecosystems. So I'm really excited for that. And a lot of that was inspired by my work with Project Puffin. So I'm excited to be here today to talk about it.
Cool. Well, thanks, Kay. And last but certainly not least, she's been mentioned a couple times already, is our own Sue Shubal.
Well, I began my Project Puffin time in 1984 when I volunteered. Actually, I was at Hog Island the summer before that, so I got to know people. And then I spent 5 summers on Eastern Egg Rock, 85 to 89. In 90, I went down to the Galapagos, where we had a project going about dark-rumped petrels. And then I came back and did 5 years on Matinicus Rock. So like a little seabird, I tended to home back in on my home islands, which is because they just called me back every time. So being a seasonal worker, I was able to go and explore different things and different birds during the off time. But currently, I am back in the islands helping support the research staff on the islands as the assistant sanctuary manager. I'm also an outreach educator to share the data with the public and kids. And very exciting for me is that now we've acquired a decoy shop so that we can help provide the tools for social attraction to projects all around the world. Here's one of our mariachi band decoys. We have all sorts of, this company was called Mad River Decoy, and they donated it to Project Puffin a few years ago. So it's great fun to be able to create these tools so that we can communicate with seabirds. That's how I'm thinking of it these days, communicating to them about safe places to nest.
Cool. Yeah, Sue always brings the best props to these webinars. The rest of us just struggle to compete. Hey, I think we'll probably have a good number of questions in the chat, but just to kind of start us out, and a few of you have alluded to this already, but it would be great to hear more, maybe even some details about how your experiences with Project Puffin have really translated into your subsequent careers. Kind of how was your time in Maine helped you launch kind of the direction you've gone, or maybe how it's inspired you to follow the path you're on. And you know, any detail would be fun to hear. I think, you know, it could be a story about your favorite bird. It could be, you know, working with some favorite people that happened while you're here. But if anybody has kind of some more details they'd love to share, that I think that'd be a fun way to get started.
Perhaps.
I can start. Oh, okay, go ahead, Alfonso. You
No,
go
no,
ahead.
No, mine is just a minor detail. Just so that I learned how to play ukulele at, at those islands, and I actually took my ukulele back to Mexico, and then other folks were also part of the
Right.
Hearst International Fellowship. So at some point, we started to have this movement also in Mexico, and people were on different islands also playing some
Pretty
songs
much.
in there. Yeah.
Jen's going for
Yeah, I think
I
Jen
now
went
own-
searching for a prop.
Yeah,
There we
Oh, so
go.
I own,
nice.
but I can't actually play them. But yeah, of course, the ukulele is made by Sue, and they're awesome. But yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that I think I mentioned this before, but just some memories that I was thinking about when we were planning for this. I always remember this first time I got into a blind on Egg Rock. I remember we got there and we had to put all the blinds together because they're always taken apart, and then there's always this couple of days of like building the blinds and figuring out how all that works. And we finally got them up, and I was able to, you know, get into a blind. And I think it was the first time that I've ever like been inside a tern colony and a puffin, be able to see the puffins so up close and witness their behaviors, you know, without them knowing you're there. So it's just this really, you know, galvanizing experience for me to witness that and be so entwined with the seabird lives that really, you know, lit a spark in me to continue to study seabirds, and, you know, able to take all those skills, leadership skills that I developed as a supervisor on the island. You know, you're kind of thrown in there, you have to juggle a lot of different responsibilities of logistics and, you know, getting food out to the islands for the people. Is there enough water? You know, in addition to managing all the data. And so it really was helpful for me to develop the skills to lead a crew and manage all those different responsibilities. And so helped me feel confident to take that into future projects. Just to some of my initial thoughts.
I just want to jump in with something Jen said about like being out in the blind and watching bird behavior, because at least for me, I'm an experiential learner, and there is insight that I gained from simply just watching birds doing their daily behaviors and activities and just being themselves that it's inspirational of a kind of curiosity that you can't get if you just read about this stuff online. And I feel like being able to interact with sort of the conservation work that was happening before my eyes was the reason why I ended up figuring out that I wanted to go to grad school for certain topics. And yeah, I just wanted to comment on that.
Andy, I think you're maybe speaking, but I'm not hearing anything. Still don't have it. All right, we'll come back to you. You know, Kay, maybe I could follow up. I think I saw a question in the chat, and it was asking about kind of the details of the science of bird conservation that you've learned. I'm just wondering if maybe there was some specific types of data that you've collected with Project Puffin that you might be thinking about applying in your master's program.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like because I'm interested in bird behavior, some of the techniques that we use on the islands isn't necessarily exactly related. Like we're collecting a lot of sort of ongoing monitoring conservation data where we're counting the population, or like you said, we're watching what fish the birds bring in. And those techniques are not necessarily translatable to doing a behavioral study. For example, I might want to be deploying ethograms and really sort of breaking down behavior in a more qualitative way. But I couldn't have even dreamt of doing that without getting to know these ecosystems first. So being able to see what I'm working with and see how these birds are interacting with each other, like within a nest and between nests as well, it's highly valuable information for any project you could potentially dream of.
I think that is so interesting when you get to watch them and see them as individuals. You know, how terns, they have really different inherent behaviors by individuals. So you can't just say, well, terns are so mean. Like there are some who are actually mean and go out of their way to peck you in the head. I noticed someone was asking about how we try to avoid the head pecking. But I remember really paying attention to not only the food choices, like how some Arctic terns would specialize more in smaller food, the amphipods, the invertebrates, versus some who would never go to that, even when fish was really low. And I didn't really correlate that to the bad neighborhood, but we did notice that some terns were so much more forgiving to their neighbors and would even adopt a chick who would end up in their nests. And other terns would really grab a neighbor chick and just beat it to death. So I do think it's really interesting to see the spectrum of animal life as individuals, like the way we can sense personalities in people. It really goes through many other species also.
Can you hear me now? Did it come through?
Yes.
Okay, good. I don't know what happened. And I was at the time I was with Kay's observations, but actually Sue's. I mean, it was our soap opera at the time, watching who was the bad husband and beating up on the kids, and who was sneaking around mating with others. But blowing that out into a population, what really stuck with me throughout my life and to this day was how these birds were such indicators in the interface between terrestrial and the aquatic realm on how the health of the oceans these birds are so sensitive to. And it really instilled on me the population medicine, the health medicine in the environment. And I remember at the time, I was 18 at the time, and I was watching this and watching the dynamics of, you know, fish stocks switching out and the birds trying to respond to that, and some of the populations actually crashing because there wasn't enough food around, but then they would try to maneuver to other food sources. And I just remember talking to Steve on how these are the indicator species of the health of the ocean. And they're far sensitive compared to some of our other techniques that we use, which are lagging indicators. It really drilled into me on how important they were for the environment.
That's a great testament, Andy. You know, there was a question in the chat asking about really bad situations for seabirds, and I don't think I want to go there too much, but there's certainly some looming challenges for seabirds, and climate change is a big one. And particularly for seabirds that nest on low-lying islands, like some of the albatross in the Central Pacific. And a couple of us were talking about before we started up the webinar about an effort in Mexico. And Alfonso, I wonder if you could speak to the effort to translocate black-footed albatross to Mexico, kind of using some of the Project Puffin techniques?
Sure. The truth is that I'm not super related to that project right now. Nevertheless, what I know from my colleagues working in that project is that of course we have this problem in Hawaii, in Midway, that you just mentioned, raising waters and decreasing the breeding habitat for lice and albatrosses, as well as for black-footed albatrosses. So the idea here is to relocate some of the black-footed albatrosses to Guadalupe Island, which is located on the Mexican Pacific. Why to this island? Because this is a high level island, like dozens of meters above sea level. So if we have a colony in there are good chances of this population to thrive, at least when speaking about raising waters. And we do have a population of lice and albatrosses in there, a thriving population, and there used to be black-footed albatrosses on that particular site. And this is a joint effort, a binational effort that is going great, is going well. Chicks are surviving. Actually, they brought chicks and eggs, and both are doing well. So yeah, we will keep track of that project and happy to let you know more as I get more news.
Thanks for that update. And you know, that's just an example of kind of how the techniques and a lot of the people who've come through Project Puffin are really contributing to seabird protection and restoration around the world. You know, another question that I noticed was from someone who's a high school student currently, kind of thinking about opportunities for the future. And maybe, Kay, since you're closest to that, I think, among our panel, maybe you could start off with some thoughts, and anyone else would certainly be welcome to join in. And I guess before you start, Kay, I'll just mention that at Project Puffin or the Seabird Institute, we're always looking for passionate, hardworking folks. So definitely keep us in mind. But Kay, why don't you share some thoughts?
I have a lot of thoughts about this. First of all, it's so great to hear that young people are interested in joining the field. We need that. Also, I'm not an expert on the programs out there that are the best for getting into this field, but I will say maybe some other people on the panel will have some tips or a list of places that are great. But I will say that no matter where you go, your education there, it's all for you. Like, you can go out and find classes that are interesting to you and let your interests guide you. And this was a big revelation for me when I realized that there's nothing you have to do. You can let your passions or your curiosity about conservation guide you through college. And I think not setting expectations for yourself at the start is maybe good advice, and just seeing where it takes you. Let me think. Yeah, I mean, I found Project Puffin towards the end of my college career, and I wasn't totally sure what I wanted to do around then. So I would honestly advise just explore, and then I think that will do you well in the long run.
Yeah, I would just echoing what Kay said. I think you know, getting as much experience as you can, you know, in a lot of different areas, and making connections, and you know, if you're fortunate enough to be able to volunteer at places, or just get, you know, internships like with the Puffin Project, Seabird Institute, different places, you know, will really help you in determining where you wanted to, you know, direct your education, but also just making those connections and learning the techniques and being able to make yourself, you know, more experienced and more qualified for future positions. But just being able to get out there and if you're lucky enough, and there are a lot of job boards out there. You know, I know the Pacific Seabird Group, which is an organization, they post a lot of job opportunities. I remember back when it used to be like a paper job listing used to come out, and that was always like the thing to get. But now with the internet, you know, there's so many job listings. I think there's a lot of opportunities to find ways to volunteer, either, you know, locally or on your summers off from college.
I would say, I mean, I advise this to any student. It's connections, 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 connections. And I know Project Puffin set me up with quite a few connections, even though I went the veterinary route. It's all about that. If you got great soft people skills and you're a hard worker and you're interested in, you know, data and making sure your statistics and, you know, is tight and all that stuff, you'll be a catch to proceed forward. But it is about connections.
Yeah, that's always good advice. You know, a couple related questions I'm noticing in the chat is if there's any volunteer opportunities with the project, maybe shorter term opportunities. We often do have short-term volunteer opportunities. Because of COVID, we have not been able to offer those last year or this coming season, but definitely keep us in mind for future years. But there is a message in the chat that I think Rachel dropped in there. We do have a service learning course at our Hog Island Audubon camp planned for this September. And that would be a great way to get introduced to seabirds in Maine and the Maine coast and islands in Maine. And that course is it's a course that mixes education and some service work to benefit islands and the birds that use them in Maine. So definitely search through the chat if that might appeal. Let's see.
Don, there was a great
Rachel,
question.
do you have anything that I missed?
Yeah, there were a couple of great ones about tracking seabirds in the ocean, specifically if we know where seabirds go in the winter.
Yeah, maybe I could start with that, and then other folks could jump in. But you know, tracking technology has just leapt forward with particularly all the advances in electronics around cell phones. Just technology is so miniaturized now that we have successfully tracked several of the species we work with in Maine, and lots of seabirds across the world are continually being tracked. But I'll just mention one example of work that our program led was the tracking work exploring the migration of puffins. We found that there's a number of areas important to puffins, but in the late winter in particular, there's an area a few hundred miles south and east of Cape Cod at the continental shelf break that seems to be a really important habitat for puffs to fuel up before they return to their colonies and begin nesting, kind of get them in good condition and all well prepared to raise young. And actually a portion of that habitat was set aside in 2016 by President Obama as a national marine monument, the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts National Marine Monument, or Marine National Monument, I think it is. And that's something that Audubon advocacy played a strong role in kind of raising the awareness of how important that area was or is, and was really key to helping that area be protected. And since then, there's been some back and forth on the degree of protection, but Audubon has kind of stayed in the game and continued to advocate on behalf of seabirds for that particular place to be protected. So I don't know if others have some interesting tracking stories to share, or we could move on to another question.
Unfortunately, I was before tracking. Too early in my.
Yeah, we're definitely benefiting from technology and using it to ask new questions. Certainly, offshore wind development is an area that we want to be smart about. We want to put wind turbines in appropriate places where they won't impact seabirds. And one way to learn where suitable places are is through tracking technology. And we have these ongoing right now to look at those issues around our Maine islands. Rachel, do you have others?
Yeah, there's another specific question that Alfonso might be able to help answer for us, specifically asking about seabird guides in Mexico supported by the government, and asking if there are policies underway in Mexico to balance tourism with conservation of coastal birds and seabirds, and any broader lessons learned from organizations around the world on how to strike that balance.
Yes, yes, definitely. So there are good examples of this sort of balance in Mexico. So for example, in Baja California, where we have these protected areas that are breeding grounds for whales, for gray whales, and are at the same time a big tourist spot. We have thousands of people arriving every year to see the gray whales very close to the boats. And that is, of course, being an important income generating activity for the local communities. We have something similar happening, but in this case with birds in the south of the country, where we have local guides taking people to see different species on the rainforest or temperate forests. And at the same time, the fees from tourism that came into the park at some point are going back to those parks or being distributed among other parks, which in turn use these resources to fund conservation projects, most of the time or on an important percentage being managed by local communities. Of course, there are things to do. We do have some other important areas. I think she was mentioned Huatulco, where of course, definitely more work is needed. Not only there, for example, we have islands in the Caribbean where more policies and stronger policies are needed. Some other efforts to prevent introduction of invasive species or to restore bird populations are really needed. Nevertheless, yeah, there are good things happening in there. And in terms of experiences in global organizations, perhaps I can speak from West Africa and BirdLife point of view, where we also are supporting alternative income generating activities for local communities in different countries. As you know, many of these millions of people are living on coastal areas, and we do have those important sites for the East Atlantic Flyway all along there, of birds coming from the UK, from Iceland, from northern countries, seasonally migrating to Africa. So we are working to protect those sites. And at the same time, of course, there's need to be some social safeguards in place, which often can involve these sort of activities such as ecotourism or bird watching. That's something that we are also developing on that region. And there are very good examples to follow in Africa that we can make the connections with, and perhaps bring to other geographies such as Mexico.
Yeah, I can touch on a little bit of what's a project that I'm involved in here in California, which is kind of related to that. It's Seabird disturbance reduction project. And we're looking at ways to reduce disturbance to seabirds on the coast of California, primarily from aircrafts. So we're doing a lot of outreach to pilots, trying to reduce overflight disturbance where birds might be flushed off of their colonies. And when they do that, they leave en masse, and lots of times they'll destroy their eggs as they're leaving. Just one event, one low overflight can cause a big loss of colonies. So, and we're also looking at shore-based disturbance from people walking or dogs on the beach, as well as kayakers. So just trying to teach people. And then there's a question about that too, and I saw in the chat about how can I protect seabirds and be aware of seabirds when I'm on vacation. So just trying to teach people ways to be seabird safe and seabird aware, so they're not causing disturbance while they're out recreating and enjoying our lovely coastline. And there's a lot of information on the website, the Seabird Protection Network, that talks about ways to prevent disturbance.
That's
Keeping
great.
distance from nesting birds, not leaving trash on beaches. That's also
Mhm.
very important.
Leashing your pets on if you have them on the beach.
Yeah. You know, a couple questions that have caught my eye now, and maybe this one we could mention to either Andy or Sue, but that's connections to zoos and aquariums around the country and between Project Puffin and kind of zoos and aquariums.
Yeah, we've had a long history of keepers from zoos and aquaria coming to do a stint so that they can really learn about the behavior of wild birds. It's very helpful for them to know how a bird would act out in its natural habitat and then go back and take that information to their charges in captivity. So we have people from SeaWorld regularly, New England Aquarium. We've had the Long Beach Aquarium of the Pacific, Disney people, I think. So quite a few different places. Oh, Missouri, a bunch of different zoos and aquaria have sent people to volunteer with us.
Yeah, and I can speak firsthand. When I was at the National Aquarium in Baltimore, we definitely had people go up there. But one of the biggest things, advantages of this is not only for the care of the animals, but it's the storytelling that those keepers and aquarists can tell the guests. And that just brings a whole nother dimension of influence when you can tell those personal stories of what happens on the islands and how Project Puffin is helping to save seabirds. And so that connection brings it from, the city out into the wilds and back and forth. And so that's a really important service that the Seabird Institute is doing.
Also, on the puffineer side of that, it's really interesting to hear from people working in zoos and aquariums who come to the islands, because their perspective on conservation work is obviously different. And so, especially as like an early career person, I know now that that's like a career option, and I can talk to the people who come to the island from like zoos and aquariums and hear about what their job entails as well. So it's definitely a both ways sort of learning situation.
That's great. I just noticed a question about online webcams, and I can't resist plugging a couple that we run. We have both an osprey cam that's based at our Hog Island Audubon camp, and a puffin cam, including a burrow cam, so you can watch an individual or a pair of puffins incubate their egg and raise their chick. And those are both moderated through the explore.org website, so you can go look for them. The question was kind of about how that can help connect people to individual birds and then more broadly nature in general. And there was a question about incorporating these kinds of things into school programs. And Sue, you do a bit of that. Maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, the cams are mostly active when the kids are out of school, but they do like to have that resource after they've learned about the amazing seabirds in their classes in the spring. Sometimes they can, but at the tail end of school, they can get the beginning of the puffin season, and that gives them something to look forward to. But it's definitely a nice way to bring real life to their learnings.
Cool. There was a question about social media handles of the panelists. And I think if any of you are interested in entering your social media handles, feel free to throw that in the chat. There's certainly handles for Project Puffin and the Seabird Institute. And I will just plug that Kay runs a very nice Instagram account based at Eastern Egg Rock, which I don't have the handle off the top of my head, but Kay, maybe you recall that and could type that in. So there's definitely some ways.
Oh, sorry.
I
think it's just at Eastern Egg Rock on Instagram, and everyone should go follow us. We're going to have a great season. And typically we talk a bit about what's going on in the season. So there's a good bit of sort of hard science that we talk about in terms of, and we answer your questions too. But we also like to intersperse like interesting life stories that happen to us out on the island, because it gets pretty wild sometimes. So at Eastern Egg Rock, I'll also type it into the chat.
Yeah, that really highlights the how much things have changed on the islands from when I was there, when we didn't have even cell phones. And we were talking about this before, you know, now you can follow along on Instagram and updates, which is a great way to communicate what's happening on the island. We used to use the CB radios to communicate with the other islands and the mainland. So, and now you guys have internet and you can stream TV shows and all kinds of things out there. So it's really different, but that's a great way. That's great that you're doing that, Kay, and can, you know, connect the people at home and to what it's like to be out on the island.
Hey, while we have you, oh, I'm sorry, Don.
Oh, no, Rachel, I think you're probably prompting us to start thinking about our timing. And
we have about 8 minutes left. Before we run out of time, I wanted to see if, I know Kay brought some visuals, and we got a question early on about terns like to dive bomb people apparently, and why they do that and what you do about that in order to protect yourself. So Kay, if you want to talk about that a little bit, I'll share the photo that you sent around.
Oh yeah, totally. And everyone feel free to chime in because we have all experienced this. But yeah, basically every time you head out for the summer, you want to bring your headgear. And you can see in this picture, I actually think I might have picked that up on Matinicus Rock, but basically you want something that's going to stick out above your head so that the terns don't poke you. Because when you're in the colony, which I should say, first up, is not for a very long period of time. All of that is regulated, so we're not disturbing the birds more than we need to. You want to wear this headgear, or some people, there's like lots of different options. Everyone has a different style, but it's basically just so that they don't hit you directly in the head. I don't know if the other panelists have preferred headgear for going out into the colony. I'll mute myself if they want to chime in.
Well, basically, you just have to have something that is higher than your head. They'll hit the tallest thing. So
Right.
you can also stand next to someone
A really tall person. Yeah.
them. And party hats work pretty well.
I know on and I work on Anacapa Island, or the Channel Islands. We have it's not terns, but it's gulls, big gulls, big Western gulls, and they are really, really strong. And we actually wear hard hats when we're in there, and they will actually work in a team where one of them will come in and they'll knock the hard hat off your head, and then while it's off, they go in for the kill. So yeah, they can be pretty fierce. But just to explain that they are doing that as protecting their chicks, and like Kay was saying, it's for short periods of time while we're transiting into the blinds or doing specific surveys. But yeah, it can be a shock to people that have never experienced that before.
We were so desperate, we used a metal colander that we used to, for food prep, and then big gull primary feathers to stick on top of that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we use the gull feathers a lot.
We used to use those kind of feathers in Mexico, but then we realized that Western gulls were we needed a bit more effort to protect, so we can be protected from them. So we started to use those climbing helmets. Actually, so
And it's not hitting you. They also like to, bless you with their droppings when you're in the colony. So that was always fun. And we always tried to keep one clean, at least I tried to keep one clean shirt or something like that didn't have tern poo on it. And every time I'd run out to the bathroom in that, they would inevitably hit me with something on the shirt. So
it was too clean.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's lucky, I've heard, to be pooped on by a bird. And then speaking of birds on your head, Kay, do you also want to tell us about the time that you role played as a rock for a puffin?
Yes, I was really hoping I would be able to tell this story. But going back to tracking, actually, um, a great part of tracking is waiting for your bird to come back. And I was helping the tracking team in 2019 on Matinicus Rock. And the way I helped them was by being a rock. So I don't know if you guys can see me, but I am, yeah, right in there, right under the puffin's head. Or the puffin's on my head. I'm right under the puffin's feet. It was extremely magical. And yeah, I've held them. I've held the adult puffins, but having one stand on my head was otherworldly. It loafed around for a bit too. I definitely didn't know that I was there. Or maybe it did and it was just playing around. Probably not.
I will speak just for myself, but I'm very jealous that you've had a puffin stand on your head. Yeah. Well, Rachel, we're probably close to wrapping up. I wonder if there's time for anybody to add, any of the panelists to add any last thoughts, any quick stories to share, or any thoughts about Project Puffin and the Seabird Institute and how that's impacted your lives, or just, inspired you.
I guess I was going to add one of the highlights for me was my mom was able to come out when I was on Egg Rock and do a 2-week stint on island with me, and I think she's on today, but she was probably in her 70s at that time. So and at that time we didn't even have an outhouse or anything, so it was pretty rustic, but it's a great bonding experience for us and for my whole family. They're all puffin crazy and seabird crazy, so yeah, just grateful for all those memories and all the great friendships that I've made and have continued, for many, many years and into other projects through the project.
I'd say an important learning is that being cold and wet, covered in bird guano, and pecked in the head might be the secret to happiness.
I've been on all sides of the coin of funding different projects. Many. I've been, for the last 20 years, I've been overseeing the Marine Conservation Fund, and then also been on many different projects of reintroduction, including sea turtles and manatees and panthers and all sorts of things. And I've never seen a more effective group that have not only been effective at building animal populations, but also building capacity throughout the world. So my hat's off to you guys.
I have 2 lessons that I learned from my time in there. First one is about the importance of long-term restoration programs and how that can change whole entire ecosystems, bring them back to historical levels, and the impact that they can have on communities. The second lesson learned is eat everything that is edible around you. And so we used to pick those things that were good for food, were edible, and yeah, of course, that was one of the survivorship skills that I learned from the project.
Okay, any last words?
Yeah, I think just the last thing I want to say is that if you're ever doubting whether you can do work like this, don't doubt it. Just do the work to get to this point where you've done, like Jen was saying, internships and volunteerships, and keep following your passion. And yeah, don't question whether this work is right for you based on the way you look or the way you feel personality-wise, because it belongs to all of us who care about conservation and the planet.
Wow. Well, maybe I get the last word, but I want to thank all the panelists. But I want to thank all the puffineers who've worked for the Seabird Institute over the years. The program has done an amazing job of helping seabirds in Maine and developing techniques that are helping seabirds around the world. But what I really think of as the most important legacy of the program is the people that have come through the program, done the work, and then gone on to do amazing things. And you five are excellent representatives of that group that's now in the hundreds, maybe thousands at this point. And I think that's just an amazing legacy of this program, and what I am, super proud of, to be involved with today. Each of you, and thanks for everyone who's tuned in. Rachel, I don't know if we have any last words for the audience before we go.
No, just thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who registered, you'll get a link to watch the recording again. It'll also live on National Audubon Society's Facebook page, so you'll be able to rewatch it there anytime with or without a Facebook account. That's all we have for today. Thank you all so much.
Thanks everyone for joining.